Welcome in, fellow NBA diehards. This is Dropping Dimes, and today is just a quick recap of the two games last night. I'm sure those listening or watching right now saw the games just like I did. I was jazzed for it, much to my wife's chagrin, as they posted on the broadcast. It's the shortest amount of time between the end, the crowning of a champion, and the start of the next season. I believe they said it was 71 days. It is kind of ridiculous that we're already back to it, but I'm excited. So we already got people chiming in. If you want to comment on the live stream, I will be checking in with your comments. I'll get to it in just a second. But Ruben, thank you already for the comment. And if you want to watch this in the future, you can just go to youtube.com/dropping dimes, and you can find I put the live stream up a half hour. I put the tweet up a half hour before I go live each and every week. And I'm going to try and stick to a Wednesdays at noon. Although next week, I won't be able to do it. So I'll be doing it at noon on the 31st, not on the 30th, just because I won't be at home until later that day. So anyway, let's get to the games last night. We'll start with the first one, Nets versus the Warriors. And as Ruben 25E says, KD looked about 90% scary, 90% scary to see. Man, I would say he looked even maybe a little bit better than 90%. Man, did KD look good last night. And Kyrie even looked shooting-wise a little bit better. But what was nice to see from KD is he didn't settle for shots outside. I believe he went 1 for 2 from 3. He was driving to the lane, finishing at the rim. He had 7 free throws, which means he's taking contact. He went 7 for 7 from the line. He filled in the stat sheet across the board. He was a defensive presence. I loved it when Gary Harris opted not to shoot a wide open 3 and kicked the ball over. And the next time down, Durant was hounding him, saying, basically, you need to shoot that. And Harris went on to shoot 4 of 8 from the field. So he's a positive presence within his team there, is cheering guys on. When Karis LeVert was going off in the first half, him and Kyrie and all the other teammates were the first ones, to start cheering. I guess there are no other fans, so no one else would be cheering, but you know what I mean. And then on the flip side of it, boy, Steph looked rusty. Wiseman looked pretty good. And then outside of that, man, Oubre, I believe he went 3 of 14. Wiggins wasn't a whole hell of a lot better. I slated them to, that was one of my upset things. If I, 2 days now hindsight, what would I change about the rankings that I did? I don't know if I'd put the Mavs so high. I put them at 3. I think 5 is probably closer to, but not that big a deal. Nets at 4 in the 4 spot, I might bump them up a little bit. I mean, it's one game, but if KD already looks this fluid, now there's still going to be time as they need to work together, but dear God, they already looked like a well-oiled machine on some level. But to get back to the Warriors, so the reason I had them at 8, because I assumed Curry would get Harden's usage rate this year, and Curry has always been much more efficient when it comes to his shooting than Harden is. So if you could give him that offensive load, let's see if his percentages can maintain and his efficiency, even if it only dips a little bit, if his usage rate goes up to Harden levels, then he'll have a scoring season unlike anybody's business. But the problem is, if Wiggins can't help him at all, then they're really relying on Wiseman to be that second offensive punch, because Draymond Green is just not going to really be that guy anymore, and he's out right now. But if Wiseman could be legit, then you shift, Draymond over to the 4, and it just helps solidify your defense, and he gets you offensive points when need be, and he can still pass the ball really well, but you don't exactly need him for his offensive punch at all. But man, Wiggins and Oubre were just black holes. And then when you go further on down the line, Pascal, it's hard to to say what exactly he is after this. Marquise Chris looked interesting at times. So he might be, a nice little piece for them. They just don't have much. And then after watching last night's, game, putting them at the 8, it seems like a bridge too far at this point. Now, Curry didn't shoot particularly well. I think he shot like 33-ish% from the floor, somewhere in that ballpark. I think, he'll obviously raise his percentage. It's the first night. It's the first real NBA action he's seen in a long time. Would this team be markedly different if Klay was in the lineup? Yeah, without a doubt, because then it just frees up Wiggins to not really need to be the second option. I like Wiggins as the third option, not the second. And then by default, then that elevates Oubre technically to the third option. And I think Oubre would be better served hovering around the 4 or 5, because Oubre can't get his own shot. He's not a playmaker. He's not somebody that you like, okay, kick it over to him and he can ISO over on the side for a little while and then create. It's not really what he does. At least what I've seen him do. What I've seen him do and be most effective is cutting to the basket, getting the ball, getting it somewhere, in the paint and doing a little work there. Not having to shot create. It just doesn't seem to be his strong suit. He seems more the athletic type of individual as opposed to the skill set of getting, shots. So, well, Ruben chimes in again. Wiggins playing like vintage Wiggins, sarcasm intended. Yeah. Wiggins was very much like Wiggins. Once again, you could have told me Wiggins played all 48 minutes last night or Wiggins played 8 minutes last night. And I could believe both, because he's out there and you don't feel his presence. And that's kind of been Wiggins' MO for a long time, which is unfortunate, but he just disappears at times. I remember the first time I saw him at Summer League, and I was in the stands. So the way they set it up is they do it on UNLV's campus, and there's the men's stadium, the men's court and the women's court. And the men's court, has 10,000 seats, 12,000 seats, whatever. And the women's is much smaller. It's a couple thousand, it looks like a high school gym. And we're over in the high school gym side, and the Cavs are playing, and we're sitting there watching. It's me and Tripoli, who I had on 2 shows ago. And a Cleveland Cavs fan calls and says, "Hey, what do you think of Wiggins? Like, how's our guy looking?" And we both said, if you can trade him right now, do it. If you can get anything for him, do it, because he disappears out on the court when he is easily the best player out here. And this is in Summer League. And it's just like, you forget that he's out there at times. And in the middle of the game last night, he did it again. And yet, simultaneously, he was in top 20 in scoring last year. Perhaps Wiggins is in top 20 in scoring again this year. Who knows? If he manages to do that plus Curry, yeah, they'll still make the 8 spot. They got a damn good shot at making the 8 spot, because you still have the steadiness of Curry. You've got Kerr's leadership. Looney's been there. Draymond, if he can come back and maintain his health, and you don't really need to rely on him for offense if Wiseman can grow. Because he looked good last night, man. He had a nice dunk for his first points. Late in the game, he shot a 3 from the top of the key. It looks pretty fluid. For a guy that only played how many college games? I don't watch college, but I know that he only played like a couple, and then he got suspended. So he hasn't really played in any full game action. He gets the start after no real training camp, no summer league, nothing. And they're like, you know what? We're going to start this kid, and he looks good. He very well could be exceedingly legitimate. And if all the, cards go right, he could be an all-star in a few years. He's got a lot of offensive talent. And to be that skilled and that fluid already after playing so few games over the past 2 years, they've got something there. But the Nets just, top to bottom, how do you not like, you already like Durant and Kyrie, so they're going to start DeAndre. Always knew that was happening. Dinwiddie gets the start, which means Karras comes off and leads the bench there, and Gary Harris. So their starting five is not really that shocking. But Gary Harris coming off the bench with Jarrett Allen like a spark plug. And then minutes-wise, let me look at the minutes real quick between the two. So DeAndre played 17 and Jarrett played 19. Although a bunch of guys down the list, Reggie Perry, Bruce Brown, Carux, Tyler Johnson got 6 minutes of play last night. So that's last night's minute totals are not indicative of what they're going to do overall, because towards the end of the game, they were up by so much that they had their third unit in playing solid minutes. So I'd be interested to see how the minutes shake out, because Jarrett Allen already got more last night, and I would assume going forward, he's going to get more. It's going to be somewhere along the lines of that, DeAndre getting 17 to 20, and then Jarrett Allen getting 25. And then they do 2-3 minutes from somebody else to fill in for Jarrett Allen, just to get him a little bit of rest. And, but as a top 7, kind of top 8 rotation, because then you still have Landry Shamet, Taurean Prince, plus Jeff Green. That's a deep team. That's a really interesting and deep team. And Caris LeVert coming off the bench. He put in 20 points last night. Most of that was in the first half, where he was, just smoking guys, getting to the lane, getting to the hoop. Nice little up and under pivot, good footwork. He looked good. The Nets look really good. One game, though. Take it with a grain of salt, but I think what you can take from that is the Nets look legit, and the Warriors have some stuff to figure out. But I take it less as a condemnation of the Warriors and more of praise for the Nets, because it's unsurprising that guys might be rusty and shots aren't falling in this first game, because there's been, especially for like the Warriors, they haven't had game action in so long. Whereas the Nets were at least down in the bubble, and they had those guys playing then, which is a little bit sooner than the Warriors were. And the Warriors are on some level putting more pieces together with Oubre and Wiggins having not played with Oubre and Steph and Wiseman before, and Wiseman not really getting having not played. Whereas the Nets, just like you're returning a lot of guys that have been playing together for quite a while, with Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, Caris LeVert. Like all these guys have had run together as a team for a little while. Not all these guys, but like 5, 6 of them or so. And Ruben over in the side said, what do you think of Nash's thoughts on making LeVert the 6-man spark for the team, similar to Ginobili's role? If Karras buys into it, I think it's great. A guy that can score that well, who would easily be starting on of the 30 other teams, I think you could easily make a case he would start on 15 of them without even having to think about it that hard. But I bet you could go even higher and say 22 to 24. Very few teams are that stacked that they couldn't use someone of Caris LeVert's, quality caliber at the guard position to start. So the Nets look scary. The Nets look very scary. And it all came down to, at least in these eyes, how well Durant looked from day one. And Durant looks good. And it's good to see, man, that then it gives you a hope for Klay Thompson. Maybe that's not going to be the, traditionally semi-tragic injury a la Kobe or Chauncey Billups. Although Wes Matthews came back, Wes Matthews never really had the explosiveness of Durant or the ability of Klay Thompson. So the fall off for him wasn't as dramatic as it was going to be for somebody like Durant, who can literally shoot from anywhere on the floor and is dangerous at 7 feet tall. So let's move on to the other game, the more marquee matchup of the two. The showdown of Los Angeles. Once again, back-to-back years. We're opening night of the NBA. It is Clippers versus Lakers. Last year, it was Lakers at Clippers. technically. This year, it was Clippers at Lakers. Last year, the Clippers won by 10. This year, Clippers won by 7. So Paul George was lights out last night. The problem is you got to take that with a massive grain of salt. Yeah, he looked good last night, but at the same time, it's like, I still don't know how that translates to the playoffs. I realize I'm projecting 71 games from now, but we've seen him fall apart. Did he learn something from last year's playoffs? And is he going to grow? God, I hope so. Because right now he's been playing the blame game. And then at the end of the season last year, it was like, oh, well, it wasn't championship or bust for us. I'm just like, get the fuck out of here with that. It was 100% championship or bust for that team last year. And it was bust. You guys straight busted. So will a new voice in Ty Lue coming in, do they maintain the special treatment that Kawhi and PG got? I don't know. The slight additions, I do like the addition of Ibaka. I think he's good. It gives them a nice bit of spacing. And it allows you to bring Zubac off the bench, and he should be able to feast on second units. And if that rotation maintains, like Serge Ibaka's look, I thought he was going to be washed by this point in his career. And Toronto really, Nick Nurse figured out how to best utilize him. And it's kind of given a second life to this latter half of his career, him and Gasol. But I just thought Ibaka, once he grew into having a 3-point shot, it really created another facet of his overall game that he was kind of lacking before, but he didn't really need it when he was with OKC because you had Durant and Westbrook and early on Harden as well. So they didn't need him to shoot threes. They needed him to get rebounds and bang down low and get those, easy putback points. So the addition of Ibaka was good. It'll be interesting to see if the subtractions the Clippers took have any long-term effect, like, Montrezl Harrell or JaMychal Green. Patrick Patterson was probably the least exemplary individual out there last night. But they got it, poured in from, Paul George was just playing so well. Kawhi looked all right. Wasn't great by Kawhi standards, but he looked all right. Lou Will didn't do all that much, but at the same time, they were up by, he got buckets when they needed him to get buckets. And that was kind of telling. The difference in this game was Clippers crushed first quarter. Lakers came back, crushed second, but then Clippers came out in the third and sealed the game. And once they had momentum at that point, even if the Lakers clawed back, which they did in the fourth, it was, the Clippers had it at that point. And LeBron had a quiet kind of first half and came alive in the second. But if you go look at the stat sheet, what's interesting is Davis and LeBron, I'll look again, but I looked last night, registered no steals or no blocks. So looking at it, no steals or no blocks. Davis, 7 boards. LeBron's 5 boards, 5 assists. Ended up with 22 points. Davis at 18. Dennis Schroeder had 14, but Schroeder was not shooting all that well. 33 from the floor, 2 of 5 from 3. But it really seemed like he shot worse than 33. The Lakers were kind of careless with the ball at certain times. Their turnover total was 19 to the Clippers 16. But the disparity during the live game action felt much greater than that. Nazir over on the side is talking about as a Sixers fan, he's scared of the Nets. Yes, you should be. Although I had the Nets better than the Sixers just because I'm not sure exactly what the Sixers are going to be just yet. And whether or not Simmons is actually going to shoot, I think is going to determine a lot of the Sixers' fate. So Josh says LeBron probably will not start playing hard until late January. I agree. That's another reason I don't think the Lakers are going to take number 1 overall. I had them at 2. I could even see them slipping down a little bit further out. LeBron only played, I believe, 28 minutes last night off the top of my head, although I got the sheet open. I could look. I genuinely think because the last season ended, he played a crazy minute total last year. It's a 72-game condensed schedule this year. They're going to have more back-to-backs, although they're going to do it along the lines of if you're in, say, a team comes into Los Angeles, you're going to play the Clippers and the Lakers, and that way you don't need to travel back and forth. You know, you're not going to go LA and then over to Denver, up to Portland, and then back to LA type of stuff. They're going to try and localize you so you're playing on their back-to-backs as best they can. They're going to try and limit their travel, or 4 and 5. They're going to be more 4 and 5s, but you know, I'd have to look at the schedule. But I'd assume like, okay, if you're going to Texas, you're going to try and play all the Texas teams while you're down there. So that way it limits the amount of actual travel you're doing. You get your rest, because it's one thing that was evident after Orlando. Guys were playing infinitely better with rest. Unsurprising. If you can immediately leave a game and go lay down in your bed, that you're going to wake up more rejuvenated than if you had to go and get on a team plane and fly to the next city's location. Unsurprising. But yeah, I agree, Josh, that I think they should limit LeBron's minutes. I think he should finally understand the fact that in 1 week's time, next Wednesday, he'll be 36 years old. And I don't know if any of you out there listening or watching are in your mid-30s or upper. I'm now 41. I'll be 42 in 5 days. And at 36, 35 going on 36. So for me, and I don't invest $1 million or so into my body every year, you know, it's sad as that is to say, I wish I did, but I don't. You know, when people would ask, like younger guys or whatnot, because, you know, I'm still playing basketball, at least not in pandemic, but once it ends, I'll still play basketball. The younger guys like, oh, eventually, like, it's true what they say, like 30 is the big pivot point. And for me, it was 35. At 35, it just, I felt any injury for much, much longer. I got tired easier in games, even though my stamina is still better than others. That's one of my best attributes, is I can run for days. So as an old guy, it gives you an advantage if your endurance and stamina is higher than others. But just bouncing back and whatnot is going to be harder. Even when he is investing all that money into his body, your body's just not going to recuperate as quickly. So perhaps what used to take him a 24-hour cycle and he'd be back to normal, now it could be like a 36 at this stage in his career. And that delay in the 12 hours is going to reduce his efficiency overall, especially with the condensed schedule. So I think a reduction in minutes overall for him makes the most sense if, in fact, they're finally getting back to what LeBron has always done, which is, not always, but primarily focus on the playoffs, not on the regular season. Playoffs is what matters most. And now that Davis has a chip and the organization has its 17th, but the first one since Kobe, they can relax. The pressure is off to some degree because they're off the schneid. And their fans are willing to see them coast a little bit if it's understood that, hey, man, it's about the playoffs. It's not about the regular season. It could come down to a seeding thing, but we'll see if fans are even allowed back in as to how much a home court advantage is going to make come playoff time. And even if, so say it's what everybody projects from last season holds over for this season, and it's Clippers versus Lakers, and that's the odds-on favorite to make it. The Lakers are going to have a home court here in Los Angeles regardless. That's why last year for me, for the Clippers, it was a huge advantage to be down in Orlando, because if they have to play the Lakers here, it doesn't matter if it's technically a Clippers home game. You're still going to have the majority of individuals in there be Lakers fans. It just is. Now, it could be one of those things of at Lakers games, it's going to be 99.9% Laker fans, and that at Clippers games, it's 60% Clippers fans. But for any other team at home, is going to be a 99% type of deal. Whereas here in Los Angeles, it's like, doesn't matter. This is a Lakers town, first and foremost. So the Clippers kind of need to get around them and not have to face them if the worst case is, in the Western Conference Finals. But hopefully someone eliminates them for you, because you're never going to have home court here in town. And potentially come May or June, once people have had the second round of vaccinations and then waited I think it's 2 weeks after that for your body to produce all the requisite antibodies. And if it has effectiveness after the mutation that the British Isles are currently showing in their coronavirus, all those things hold, then quite possibly we could have fans back in the stands. But right now it's probably safer to assume that there won't be fans in the stands here in Los Angeles. So the home court advantage might not mean as much for the Lakers, but I still think LeBron should coast. And AD has a history of injuries as well, of taking him out for big chunks of the season. So you might want to get him rest and just let the younger guys play a little bit more. THT, go ahead and run wild. Man, for THT, for a guy that's 2 years in the league, I don't know how old he is. Let's say he's 22. I don't know if he stayed in college for a year or two and then came out, and now he's been in the league for 2 years. I'm not entirely sure what his age is. I can look it up real quick as I'm talking about it. But that dude's athleticism really looks, he more so reminds me of Andre Miller, for Christ's sakes, than he does. Yeah, he is 20 years old. He just turned 20 years old. So that's scary. For a 20-year-old, he does not have much, basically THT is BTR, below the rim. It is a lackluster athleticism. Now, I'm not taking away his ability to finish and get buckets, but he plays like an old man. It's interesting to watch. And both teams went deep into their rosters last night. That was super interesting. I mean, the Lakers, I would say 10 or 11 guys got run, and legitimate run on some level. Let's see. I can look it down. So 5, 10, 12 guys. Dudley and Alfonso McKinney are the only ones that didn't get any run last night. Quinn Cook only got $123. But yeah, Montrez was an interesting fit with them last night. He's a good 6-man spark, and the 2-man game with him and Dennis Schroeder was good. I think that's going to be promising going on. Kyle Kuzma played with the confidence, although Kuzma's got to be kicking himself today, man. Like Luke Kennard got $64 million over 4 years. Now, granted, Kuzma got a 3-year deal for 40, and the third year is a player option. So if he wants to opt out and he feels he's overperformed those first 2 years of his contract, he can, which is kind of unheard of on a rookie extension. So he has that added benefit, but a few guys got deals that dwarf his, and I wonder if that chaps his ass. But player option, and at the end of those 2 years, he'll be young enough to where some team, if he has 2 chips potentially under his belt at that point, is willing to overpay for him because he's been to the championship and he's still young, and you would have him at his prime. But he looked good coming off the bench. He shot 6 for 11, 1 for 3 from 3 overall. The Lakers didn't shoot particularly well from 3 at all. And I think the big difference was the Clippers shot a lot more threes. I think it was 10 or 11 threes overall. Let's see. The Lakers went 9 of 29, so 310 shooting percentage, whereas the Clippers went 14 of 40, 350 overall. But that 40, I mean, the difference of that 14 extra threes overall is huge. It's flat out huge. Although the Lakers did win the free throw disparity between the two. But it was, just like last year, both teams looked pretty good. It was good to see that the Lakers didn't roll over in the second quarter. Not to say that they would, but it's also opening night. They just won a championship a little over 2 months ago. I don't think anybody would fault them if they came out kind of stale and tired tonight, or just slowly easing into the season as opposed to coming out guns blazing, because there's no real need for them to do that. I think other teams need to prove their bona fides as opposed to the Lakers having just won a championship, but B, LeBron is on your team and everybody knows that you're the odds-on favorite to make the finals. So the bullseye is on your back. And yes, teams are going to give you their best game night in, night out, but I don't think that there's the drive. You don't need to have the drive to prove that you are the best, most unstoppable team, because the playoffs are all that really matters. Want to maintain as much home court as you can, but I think if it's at the expense of overplaying LeBron and AD to get it, I don't. You still need to beat LeBron and AD in a best of 7 series. And in the West, I think that's going to be difficult for damn near any team to do. So are there teams that could do it? Of course. And plus, we have no idea how injuries are going to shake things up. Or if, guys need to sit for extended periods of time, just from exhaustion on the 4 and 5s and the back-to-backs because of the condensed schedule. It should be super interesting to see how this plays out by the end of the season. But it was a good opening night, fun basketball, especially in that second game. That first game was done. It was a fait accompli pretty much early on. I mean, the Nets came out, curb stomped them early, and then when Curry is not playing very Curry-like, although he had a couple where as soon as he started dancing around and lifted up for the shot, I knew it was in. So it was nice to see vintage Curry. And just know that he needs to get into a rhythm and his new teammates need to figure out how to play around him. I still think they'll be good. Whether or not they make the 8th, that's to be seen. But the Nets look legit, straight up legit. And Clippers-Lakers, look, same thing happened last year. Clippers came out, won the game. We'll see if it actually translates into anything long-term for the Clippers as to whether or not they're the better team this year. But I think what holds true for LeBron also holds true for Kawhi, who I haven't talked about that much today. Let's see what he ended up for the game. 10 of 26, so 385 overall, 1 of 8 from 3. I went 5 for 5 from the free throw line, but yeah, it wasn't the best of nights for Kawhi. But as I was about to say, what holds true for LeBron, I think holds true for Kawhi. If he does have the degenerative leg condition, then playing all these games very tightly packed together is going to be detrimental to him come playoff time. So they're going to have to get him rest. Now, the league has said that they're going to come out against openly resting guys and fine teams. So all they got to really do is come up with a bullshit injury that's impossible for to diagnose. Like, I got a bad back. Okay. Well, sometimes, I don't know if anybody out there has had a bad back, but I tweaked my back at one point and went to the doctor for it. And it was kind of one of those things of, you just need to rest. And that's what I did. And eventually it went away, and then you got to stretch and do all these other things. But there was structurally nothing that I did to damage my back. It just hurt. So you could say that with Kawhi. Oh, he's got a bad back and you can get him some rest. But Clippers will need to be cognizant of that. And plus, PG now has had how many reconstructive surgeries? He had the catastrophic one on his leg at the tune-up practices to the Olympics years ago, but then he reconstructed his shoulders last year, and he's been relatively injury prone. Not that it's taken him out for, Durant or Klay Thompson season long kind of durations outside of the broken leg thing. But at the same time, it's like the wear and tear, you need to be aware of that and not stress him out too much. And so will the other guys lower down the list on that Clipper roster be able to pick up the slack for him? If they had the depth of last year's team, I would be more secure in that. But I do think they have enough talent overall that so long as they have one of those guys, your Pat Bevs, your Lou Wills, your Ibaka's, Zubac, they still got a bunch of players that can get you buckets. So if you can have one of those guys in the lineups, they'll still be a tough out night in, night out. So there you go. That is the quick recap. I hope everybody enjoyed the games last night. Tonight's got another big slate of games. I'll be interested. Also with the Rockets, James Harden was spotted at a strip club celebrating a friend's birthday or some shit like that. And whether or not he broke protocol, I don't know how Houston Rocket fans don't take this as a fuck you at this point. I understand he's disgruntled. I understand that he feels, or he knows that the metric by which everyone judges people of his caliber is how many championships that you have. And he's only made it to the Western Conference Finals, has not been to a championship outside of when he was very young with OKC. And if he doesn't get a championship, that it's going to tarnish his legacy. And it sucks that the NBA has gone that way to viewing people. It really, I think, the only time I think it merits real discussion is when we're talking GOAT. If you're in the discussion of the greatest of all time, then championships really need to come into discussion. But if you're not in the discussion of greatest of all time, which Harden, you are not, it's rarefied air. LeBron is in that discussion now. But after LeBron, in this next crop of guys, like Durant would be the next, but he'd need to rattle off a bunch of championships now having missed some time. So I don't think Durant will really more than likely enter into this discussion. So of this current crop of superstars, I don't know. Maybe it's part of this next generation of Ja Morant or any of that younger that have already shown they've got the tools to be an all-star, perennial all-star, and potentially perennial all-NBA type of guy. But I think that's the only time really GOAT status is when number of chips, I think, should determine it. Because are you telling me that Barkley's legacy is genuinely tarnished by the fact that like he's somehow lesser as a power forward? Or Karl Malone? I don't think so. But on the flip side, Dirk getting the one for Mavs in 2011 really does help elevate him. Because you look at the team around him, then he was the true alpha. So I guess I can't have my cake and eat it too on that. It cuts both ways. But anyway, Harden, I don't know. He's acting so petulantly by all reports. And what's weird is usually when all these stories come out, it's after a dude has been traded. So he's getting dragged in a way that's usually reserved for the guy being out of town, is what's called the empty the notebook. All the stories that reporters have been sitting on for years, all the time that he did this, X, Y, or Z. And especially Tim McMahon, man. Tim McMahon has been dragging him. And it's unfair to say dragging from Tim McMahon's perspective of he's just reporting what has been happening. But usually the beat writers of those teams would sit on a story like that just because they want to maintain access to that star and to that team. But anyway, so I'll be interested because tonight's game with OKC and Houston is, I believe it's OKC Houston, is tenuous as of right now. OKC is, as of an hour ago, stated they don't know whether or not the game is going. They haven't heard from the NBA or not. So I'll be intrigued to see how that ends up. But that's it. That is it for today's recap. I'll be back. Let's see. I may take off next week just because otherwise I'd have to do it the 31st. And who in the world is going to be paying attention on the 31st? Everybody across the globe is going to be gearing up for New Year's. And even if you're sitting at home, you're looking for some sort of celebration and escapism. And then coupled with the hangover of that on the 1st, and then we go into the weekend. So I'll let you know on Twitter at Matt Nost if I'm going to have a show next week, but I would assume not, just because I'm busy 28th, 29th, and 30th. So then it would leave open the 31st and 1st, and it really doesn't seem like any of you will be paying attention, rightly so, on those days. So look for me the following. I'm going to go Wednesdays every week at noon. That is my goal for the show. And I've already reached out. I got some new guests lined up for this season. I'll be bringing back some of your all your favorites and the guys that I love talking basketball with. And hopefully a couple. I've been texting with some friends that didn't manage to make it on in the bubble once I went solo, but used to do it with me over at Collider. And so looking forward to it. Looking forward to another great season. Thanks to everybody that chimed in on the chat. And PC just right there just a few minutes ago says, hi, everyone. Hi, PC. And that is it for Dropping Dimes today. Stay safe out there. If you're celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, have a safe New Year, have a happy New Year, have a fun New Year, and make sure to wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, wear your masks, do what you can, help stop the spread. That is it for Dropping Dimes today. Until I see you guys again, let's give a nice big middle finger to 2020 and move on to 2021. Adios.